finance where decisions were made very quickly so that people could buy land and buy it at expensive prices.
As developers borrowed ever greater amounts, the bank's balance sheets grew rapidly. In 2005, Sean Fitzpatrick's successor as chief executive, David Drum, pledged to double profits in 5 years. By driving lending growth, he did it in 2.
We've just reported the biggest profits in the history of the bank, 46% increase, $1.25 billion.
There was a belief that these were like a new paradigm, that these were changed times.
Peter, not his real name, was a senior loan manager for Anglo in the UK until recently. At the height of the boom, he saw firsthand what went on when Anglo backed Ireland's top developers as they poured money into the UK market. At risk to his career, he spoke to us.
There was a huge focus on breaking the €1 billion profit, and everything seemed to be geared towards that. If you're starting off looking after 40 or 50 million pounds of loans and you end up looking after 600 or 700 million pounds worth of loans, you are heavily incentivised to continue that growth. You start cutting corners.
Did you?
I can probably think of 3 or 4 loans that in hindsight I would not have done. And yeah, that does make me feel uncomfortable.
As the boom went on, Anglo's strategy was to concentrate on a small group of top clients. Peter gives examples of those who could borrow into the billions.
Ballymore had total group limits of over €2 billion. Jerry Gannon north of $1 billion. These sums were vast.
Anglo let the developers call the shots.
There were 10 or 20 clients of the bank that could ring up and virtually get a full approval over the phone because they were known to the very senior executives in the bank.
This meant that in chasing the big money of the top developers, Anglo was prepared to abandon its own vital risk assessment procedures, bypassing the bank's credit committee and board.
Banks have credit committees for a very good reason. All of them have it. And they're simply to ensure that the borrower has got the wherewithal to pay it back.
It's vital. It's the bread and butter appraisal of lending. And the board usually is a step up from the credit committee. It tells us that, there's no respect whatsoever to the safety of the institution. You're undermining it.
In banking parlance, Anglo moved up the risk curve dramatically at the height of the boom. For the top Irish developers investing in the UK, phone calls from Dublin reversed important London decisions.
There were situations where a deal was declined by London Credit Committee, and then 2 hours later you hear that it's been approved.
What was a healthy, competitive and aggressive business culture at some point, perhaps that changed into being to some pride, and pride perhaps became arrogance and a sense of being bulletproofed from any possible failure.
I promise you, we didn't take bigger risks. I think we actually took less risk.
So blind were they to risk, Anglo also lent money to both the investors and the developers in the same deal. If it went wrong, they could lose on the double.
The bank seemed to be pushing deals that it had sourced. It would provide lending to enable borrowers to buy into that deal. It seemed far too close to comfort.
Personally, I would not have been a fan because I think it does multi-tier your risk in a way that becomes difficult to accept. It happened in Anglo, yes. It happened in lots of other banks as well.
The relationship between the bankers and top developers became increasingly tight.
You had senior guys in the bank spending a lot of time with the Golden Circle or very successful developers. If you mix with developers that are taking you around to sites in private jets and helicopters, you start getting used to it.
The hospitality flowed freely in both directions.
Jerry Gannon had been entertained twice by the team in London, and each meal had come to more than £16,000 for approximately 8 to 10 people.
Jerry Gannon was just one of many developers to get treated well.
I believe there was another occasion. It was mentioned that this particular client had built the house of one of the senior executives in the bank, and if he wanted X million pounds that day, he would get it. That wasn't credit approval as far as I was concerned.
We passed through the magic mark of $1 billion in profits, and we expect to make even more profits in 2008.
As lending and profits grew, So did their big bonuses. By 2007, David Drumm's annual salary was 3.2 million, Willie McIntyre's 1.4, and other senior executives made over $1 million.
I don't believe that that greed, which is probably how people would see all this, I don't think greed was a driving force. I think there was a pride in the success of what was going on.
But we have arrived, and we ain't going anywhere.
Sean Fitzpatrick wasn't the only one in denial. The central bank and regulator appeared oblivious as alarm bells rang loudly.
Anglo-Irish Bank grew from 3% of the market to 18% in a decade. That's a growth rate of 36% per annum real, just ridiculously rapid. And I would have thought grounds for saying, no, this bank must be stopped. Even if we don't have detailed information, the probability is that they cannot safely grow at that rate.
The regulator's failure to stop Anglo was a disaster for the whole banking system. Anglo's aggressive lending became standard.
They took the market share from other banks, and the other banks had to decide whether they were going to respond or sit back and allow their market share to shrink.